Hi, I'm Dick Moberg, and I run a company called Moberg Analytics in beautiful downtown Philadelphia. And the company is creating the next generation informatics platform for neurocritical care. And the question is, why are we doing this? Well, my good friend Daiwai explained to me that a long time ago that you really can't determine much about brain injured patients by looking at an hourly measurement of intracranial pressure. And so this analytics platform we developed to kind of take a deeper dive into what the brain does. Um, so, so I've been involved in this field for a long time, for over 50 years. The first 5 or 6 years, I was in a hospital working on research in a neurosurgery lab, but they made me do intraoperative monitoring. So I rolled in this big piece of equipment into the operating room, and we monitored brains and spinal cords with it. And it's the size of a refrigerator. And then back in the 80s, I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I ended up with an idea at this little company I was doing some work for, and and they actually had a product they were developing, and we realized it wasn't working out. And so I was out at lunch with this friend of mine, Gary, and we both realized we had some very complementary skills in brain monitoring. He had developed some EEG amplifiers for meditation, and I had this experience in the hospital. We went back to the company and said, hey, I think we can develop another product. And the company actually, to our surprise, said yes. And in 18 months, we had a little brain monitor out on the market, and it's sold worldwide. And that little monitor was one of the very first microprocessor based medical devices. And it shrunk that big refrigerator sized product down to something that was would fit on a top of a desk. So that was the kind of first success. And I was in a PhD program at the time and also in medical school. And I ended up realizing this is what I want to do in my life. And I, kind of dropped out of academics and been in industry ever since. And so I spun off of that company, and we developed a second generation product. And that product, it turns out one of the early customers was Tom Bleck, one of the fathers or grandfathers of neurocritical care. And he rolled it into his ICU and started monitoring patients there. It was mainly used for in the operating room, but he used it on these critical care patients, and it was one of the first products that could continuously look at EEG, like your brain waves. And what he did is he started recording these patients, and I think he's one of the first people to actually be able to document the seizures that these patients had using the signal processing that we developed on this machine. And with that and a couple of other things, it got me very interested in critical care as opposed to monitoring in the operating room. And this was in like the early or late 90s and early 2000s. And at that same time, a whole lot of little new monitoring devices for the brain were coming out that would monitor brain oxygen, both invasively and non-invasively, and transcranial Doppler that would let you use sound waves to see the velocity of the blood cells in the arteries in the brain. So it's a very exciting time. And what I did is I used my experience in the intraoperative world where we were connecting devices there, and I said, well, we should do this in critical care. And so we developed a product that kind of put it all together. We got data from all these different devices, and we time synchronized it. And what you could see then is, if the patient's blood pressure went down, because maybe they didn't do something right, or kind of weren't paying attention to it, you could see how it impacted other physiological signals, And likewise, if the intracranial pressure went up, which you would see, how did that impact the rest of the functions of the brain? And so it was a very interesting time. And one of the things that we worked a lot on is how do you get information out of all these signals that we would display on the screen? And one of those signals was the brain waves, and or EEG is what it's called. And we developed various methods to extract information from the EEG signals to actually help the doctors figure out what's going on in the brain. Another person that's done a lot of work on this is Jan Claassen at Columbia University, and he's developed some very sophisticated signal processing techniques, kind of an extension of what we were doing, to see if a comatose patient could hear somebody and understand them, even though they were totally unresponsive. And this has been very revolutionary work that he's developed, and I'm looking forward to see where he continues with this work. So one question is, what do I think is going to happen in the future? Well, let's say 100 years from now, all right? First of all, I don't know if we're all going to be alive in 100 years from now, but let's assume we are, all right? And I think one of the things I've always been fascinated with is a theory that I heard about way back in the 70s. There was a guy came to me and he said, "You got to meet this other guy. He's very much like you." And so I met the guy, and we did have a lot in common. He was a medical student at Hahnemann Medical School in Philly. His name was Stuart Hameroff. And he shared with me a manuscript. He wrote some thoughts on these things called microtubules in the brain. And the guy was really, really smart. And microtubules are these little tubes found in cells all over the body, and they're also in the brain. And back then we were looking at like the diameter of these microtubules and talked about whether they could, generate an electromagnetic wave or just another way to communicate out of the body. And we were talking about how these might explain things like extrasensory perception, and things like that. So that was way back in the late 70s. And I lost touch with Stu, but then he kind of reemerged in my life. And he was a professor at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and he had founded this institution called the Center of Consciousness Studies. And his theories have developed considerably since the early days of Philly. And they now think that these microtubules actually create a way for the brain to become a quantum computer. And it's just phenomenal. So I think in 100 years from now, we'll probably discover and be able to use new channels of communication between the brain and people that are conscious that we don't even know about today. And I think this one may be one of them. And if you think about it, Ben Franklin discovered electricity in 1752 here in Philadelphia. And it really wasn't for like 100 years that people started using it to light streets and in their houses. And I think we're kind of back at that early discovery stage right now, with being able to really understand the conscious brain and the unconscious brain.